Hello, hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Hope you guys are all right. Welcome to this webinar brought to you by Agile Thinkers Academy and Rhubarbs. My name is Gonçalo Pereira. I'm in really great company with Johan Person. Hey, Johan, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking.
Awesome, awesome. Awesome, that's all right, that's all right. Before we begin, let me just ask the audience, where are you guys seeing us from? So right now I'm in Portugal. Johan, where are you currently?
I'm in Lidingö, right outside of Stockholm Central in Sweden.
Awesome, awesome. And if you don't mind me asking, how is the weather like today over there?
Weather is uncharacteristically non-Swedish. It's really nice and warm in Sweden for the moment, which is a big contrast to how it's been going the last half year, I guess. So
Awesome,
all good
awesome.
here. And Portugal, I hear it's you have the same weather we do, which means it's pretty bad, right?
More or less like that, more or less like that.
No.
Today is a bit raining, but yeah, I think we'll survive. We'll survive. So I'm seeing Emily from the US. Hello, Emily. Long time no see. I see Lopo from Portugal, uh, Oliver from the US also, and Justin O'Keefe from, I'm hoping to be spelling his name correctly, from Ireland. So welcome you all to this session. I'm really honored and excited to be here today. I think it's going to be a really great one, and it's a great opportunity to be here with a great practitioner, um, with someone who I was fortunate enough to get really well along from the start, and I hope you guys enjoy what we have to share with you right now. And so how is this thing going to run? So basically, we'll start with a couple of presentations about the purpose of our webinar with the general context as well, and we'll dive deep in the Wardley Mapping framework, what it is, a couple of tips and tricks, a couple of case studies, and afterwards, um, with a Q&A session for sure, with more information to you all. How can you learn more about Wardley Maps? How can you start practicing Wardley Maps? And how can you connect with Johan, with me at the Agile Thinkers afterwards? So starting with the presentations, I'm here, as I said before, with Johan. Johan is a Swedish technology and business development expert with a strong background in strategic innovation and decision making. He holds a master's degree in engineering physics and an MBA from INSEAD. And Jon combines technical expertise with business acumen to drive growth across various industries. He is the co-founder of Brewbarbs and delivers insights and solutions to clients in communications technology, major industrial companies, and telecoms. So basically, he has a passion for innovation, a results-driven approach, and commitment to creating lasting value, making him a great asset in a rapidly evolving technology landscape. Myself, I'm Gonçalo Pereira, part of the Agile Thinkers consulting and training team, and I'm passionate about the themes of strategy, of innovation, of human factors, also as well, because, well, how can you have goals? How can you have great strategies if you don't have the people and the teams to make those decisions and those strategies come to life? Well, it's going to be a bit messy and a bit complicated. And so everything is interconnected. And so for that part, well, um, it's what we are really hoping for to explore as well. So uh, just before we start, let me remind you of our event, the World Management Agility Forum. It's going to be the 10th edition of this conference in Lisbon, Portugal, and it's happening from the 19th to the 21st of September. And well, this year we have such an exciting group of speakers, leaders from great organizations, in which we'll explore amazing stories, the secret ingredients for their success, and don't forget to stay tuned for upcoming news, as I'm sure it's going to be a great celebration like no other seen in 10 years of the conference here in Portugal. And this webinar is brought to you in a little series that we call Transparency Tools. And what we mean by that is basically that it's going to help you make decisions using and with a base on the visualization. Started with Klaus Huisman on the March 21st, in which we explored the value options for business options. And if you haven't seen already, make sure you do on our YouTube channel, as I'm sure you will learn great things from this session. The third and final episode so far from this small series is going to happen on May 23rd with Dmitry Ponomarev. I'm hoping to get his name right, in which we'll explore Kanban Zone, and I'm sure it will be lots of fun. So more details to be announced in agilethinkers.com. Stay tuned for that. And so the webinar that brought me here and Johan today, and I would like to start with a question to you all that are currently watching us. So what does strategy mean to you? And while you post your answers here on our chat and our answers space, let me hit you with a couple of definitions from different authors, because this is such a great and amazing topic that might be a bit complicated to get in first. And so let me start by saying that, for example, Hulwig in 1999 said that strategy can be seen as just a plan. Okay, so Chandler firstly introduced us to strategy as a way for companies to create long-term objectives. And we have also Michael Porter in a more recent response to that question, saying that strategy is about making the choices to distinguish an organization from meeting customer needs. And so to complement these ideas and try to bring everything together, I'll bring you also one from Henry Mitzberg, saying that strategy, despite the limited view, was at that time in 85 viewed as a plan from its formulation followed by its implementation. So this is a lot to take in. This is you need to make these things simpler. And for example, if people think that agile and agile manifesto is really complicated, I can't imagine what they feel about strategy. So let me try to summarize what it means. But before that, I also want to bring you to the golden circle that was created by Simon Sinek in 2005. And from here, we get this different perspective that it's everything about the why, the way it should be done, and the purpose that it's going to be around the decisions, around the behaviors, around the different choices that companies make. And in the end, I feel that it's easy for us to understand if we define, as Mintzberg once did, good strategy is a framework for constant problem solving. It's not something that you should define or create in a 5-year time and review in 2 or 3 years. It's not something that we are going to be focused on right there. And so basically, to try to simplify that part, I'll leave you with this definition. I have Daniel here who mentions that a strategy is a plan and the capacity to plan. It's also interconnected with that. And Johan afterwards is going to dive deep a bit on that definition as well. And so let me also give you another concept, the Wood Loop, that it's a guide that makes strategy as a guide to make decisions and take action in response to our surroundings in the pursuit of some objective. The Wood Loop is basically as observe, orient, decide, and then act. You observe the environment, you orient yourself around the environment, around the context, and around the scope. You decide, you make hypotheses about the possible decisions that you can make, and afterwards you act and you experiment and you try. And this is a loop, right? You observe, orient, decide, and act, and afterwards you also observe, orient, decide, and act. And after that, guess what? You observe, orient, decide, and act. So it's a loop, and it's simple as that. Johan, I'll leave you with the more complicated part to try to get this thing in a easier way for our audience that it's providing lots of answers, lots of comments. So thank you so much for that, for your participation. And Johan, tell me, what are Wardley maps? What do the maps have to do with the loop? And what tips, what tricks can people get from to their strategy needs?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So let's try and figure out what the answer is. So to get into it, if I get to go back a little bit to the OODA loop. The OODA loop is, as you said, you observe something, you orient, which is it just means orient just means you figure out the options you have to act. And then you decide which option you choose, and then you act. And when you act, you then have impact on your environment that you then can observe, and then you get new options that you have to decide for what action you're going to take, and then you act, and so on and so forth. So that's the loop. Now, this is what you do when you do strategy formulation and strategy execution, whether you like it or not. And the problem with many strategic approaches is that lots of the orient and the decide is done by intuition. So it would be quite nice, and especially in business, it's done by intuition. So it's nice if we have some form of support to help us go through the OODA loop in a more meaningful way. So that's where Wardley Maps comes in. So if we think about strategy, and strategy comes from the military side of things. And when you have a strategy in a military sense, in a war, we typically think of something similar to the picture we see here on the left. So this is the Axis powers that are going to invade India. They're going to do it by having the Germans, I assume, coming in from the west, and the Japanese are going to come in from the right. And they are going to attack India from two sides, and we are going to have a big problem. It's pretty clear what their strategy is going to be. It's a pincer maneuver. Now, if we compare that to the situation on the right, which is a business strategy, okay, we have to have a little bit of a caveat. This is the business strategy that's communicated through a web page, so it might not be their full strategy, but all the same, we see that they're going to do a few things, pretty standard things. And if we think about it, it's likely that this company's, I think it's Vodafone, their competitors are probably doing the exact same things. So how are these activities going to make this particular company win when everyone else is doing the same thing? So having some sort of visualization is a very good way of communicating what you're trying to do, but it's also a great way of figuring out, okay, is this strategy likely to work or not? And the choices we're making in this strategy, do they make sense or not? Visualization is great for figuring that out, and that's where Wardley Maps comes in. So we need a map for business if we're going to be able to do that, and luckily we have one. It was originated or invented by Simon Wardley when he was a CEO for a Canon subsidiary, a digital company. And he was just feeling like a fraud because he was making all these strategies and doing what everyone else was doing, but didn't really have this feeling that, okay, if I make this strategy really well, it's going to make us win. It just felt like a crapshoot, essentially. And the reason why I got into Wardley Mapping is because I had the same feeling. When I formulate a strategy, I can come up with several options for what to do. But most of the time, I can come up with counter arguments that I should do the opposite. And if I'm just convincing enough, it's almost impossible to decide which of these options should I take. And I used to have this idea that in these fancy management consultancies, the way they do it is they have all these options and they just present lots and lots of data for each option, and then you can make it out. Turns out that is not true. So you have to have some other way of doing it. And usually what you want to do is you want to gain experience and understand pattern recognition. And that's where mapping really shines. So, because once you have a Wardley map, and those of you who have never seen a Wardley map before, there are all kinds of long introductions to why this map looks like this. And we'll provide you with some material and some links in the end where you can do a deep dive on it. But let's just look at it as it is and take it as a given. So what we have two axes. And on the y-axis, we have visibility. So, and we're going to put value chains onto this map where we have what we call an anchor, which is always an end user of some sort. And then we look at a value chain, and the further away you are from the customer, the less visible you are to the customer. So that's this axis. And then you have this maturity axis on the x-axis. So once you have this map, all of a sudden space has meaning. So where you are in the value chain will mean something. So if something is very far to the left, it means it's very immature. There's extreme friction in using it. It might not even be known, etc. Whereas to the right, it's very low friction to use and it's extremely reliable. So if we look at it, so in Genesis, which is then the x-axis, it's about inventing something new. It's about experimenting. It's about science fiction. It's about magic. It's about dragons. It's about magic mushrooms, essentially. It's just about pure invention. Then if something shows itself to have value through market powers, people are going to want more of it, and they're going to want to consume it in an easier way. And there's going to be competition, which is going to drive it into the custom-made area. There's going to be inertia there. You're going to have to cross the chasm. There's going to, because the users here in Genesis are not the same users as in the custom-made space. So here it's about making what you sell. So you make a special thing for each client, but it's kind of the same thing. Then if that's popular enough and you have enough demand, there's also going to be competition around that. And you're going to get a product. So then you sell what you make. You make the same thing every time. And of course, there's going to be difficulties doing that. There's making a product out of something that's custom made before. There's all kinds of problems you're going to face. You're going to have to cut away certain things. You're going to take away some of the flexibility of the product and so on and so forth. And then the final stage is being a platform, a utility. And you're going to compete on price, essentially. And there's going to be inertia around scaling. There's going to be inertia around adopting this new, very, very bland offering. What we also should know is that as we develop over time, and we get more and more mature, and there's less and less friction in the consumption of these things that we invent, other people, or ourselves, we can use these components as they get more mature. They become easier to consume, so we can build other things on it. Right? So, for instance, we get faster and faster and faster computers. All of a sudden now we have cloud computing, which is the utility version of compute. With compute, we can do all kinds of strange new things using LLMs and other AI techniques, which were simply not possible back in the day when someone was putting together a computer by hand, right? So evolution means consumption gets easier and innovation comes from consuming these new higher orders. So let's do a little bit of an example after that heavy theory session, so that we can feel good about ourselves, that we actually understand what we're talking about. So we're going to look at a cup of coffee. And I wrote a joke that I thought if I said coffee time, then half of you would go away and get a cup of coffee. I don't want you to do that. I want you to stick around. And I've stolen or borrowed or graciously gotten this example here from my friend Philippe Guenet. Because the original example is a cup of tea, but Philippe, he's French, so he drinks coffee. So let's get into it. Yeah. You're a coffee drinker too, Gonzalo?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I thought you drank like port and things like that in Portugal. No?
Well, not at business hours.
Not at business hours. Okay, no, you're serious. That's of course. So we have a user. Could be Gonzalo. Couldn't be. I don't really drink coffee, so it can't be me. So it's probably Gonzalo. He wants a nice cup of coffee. So what does it take for him to get a nice cup of coffee? It takes craft and care, and there's some sort of barista making that happen. And he needs some sort of artisan coffee beans, and he needs a professional cafetier, and that professional cafetier needs power and water. So this is like the French cultural high quality barista coffee. And as we can see here, that's custom made because it's done by hand every single time. It's special for each customer, and so on. And especially back in the day when this was made for the King of Spain, it was completely custom made. Of course, they didn't have power back then, or I guess power was firewood. So, but since coffee is kind of popular, it turns out we've had all kinds of competition to provide coffee in a more practical way, right? So we want convenience. All of a sudden, we have a different need, and that requires a different solution. So we have someone, very smart person at Nespresso, I guess sometime in the 90s or early 2000s, came up with this Nespresso idea. So that's a product stage now, and they make a home coffee machine for Nespresso, and all of this was productized because you could only get the capsules. They were branded Nespresso. They had the patent. No one else could do them. And the machines could only be the Nespresso machines. There were all kinds of trademarks and so on and so forth. So all protected in the product stage. Still needed power and water. Now the patents ran out, and now there's even more competition. And now we can get generic capsules. So almost anyone can set up a coffee brand with these capsules and compete in the market. So it's a commodity. We buy them more or less on price. Maybe there is a certain quality aspect to it, but more or less on price. And there's a standardized format for these capsules and different types of machines to buy, which are also completely commoditized. So that's what happens through supply and demand competition. And this is what's called a climatic pattern, that everything moves from the left to the right, and through competition. It's something called the Red Queen effect. So, and this is kind of a typical value chain, let's say, where most of the time we have something of relatively high value up here, and then we move right, and the further away from the user we want to be further to the right. So something we don't typically see is that, for instance, this home coffee machine, usually, if it's good, will never really rely on a custom-made or very sensitive component. So this is sort of an anti-pattern we're seeing here. So this, if you're in this situation, we're going to have to think about it. And I'm going to get to that in the examples from the real world we're going to show soon. So that's sort of a made up and strategic level example. Now let's have a look at what it looks like in the real world, because it's my intention with showing these articles. So when you look at Wardley Mapping, you get all these examples of very high strategic plays in different companies, which, okay, that's great if you're the CEO of your own company or if you're high up somewhere. But if you're an agile practitioner or maybe a portfolio manager or some such, you don't have that power. So how can you use this in your everyday life? Because it's extremely powerful, even if you're a single contributor. So let's see what we've done, and I'll show you two levels, one on a project level and then on sort of a product family level, which is more strategic. So there are a few things you can get out of it. So one of them is avoiding complications and problems, and you can use it to improve flow. So this here is a project that a customer of mine was going to execute. It's a machine learning project. And we see we have a few users up here, and they have a number of needs. And then we have some things we're building down here. And then we have some things that have already been built that are pretty standard over here. So what stands out as risky in this map? So write that in the comments. I'll give you 5 seconds to answer before I give you the answer. Because the first time you do a map, it can be difficult to, okay, I made the map, what am I going to do with it now, right? That's the difficulty. Well, one of the things you can always look for is, we can fix this with the patterns of our Wardley mapping doctrine. So there's a number of patterns that you can look through that are given by the methodology. And one of them is focus on high situational awareness. So understand what's being considered. And what we're seeing here is there's a lot of things that are relatively far from the customer needs that are far to the left. So if you remember the coffee machine, this is sort of a coffee machine they're trying to build. You shouldn't probably avoid relying on something that is very custom. So you see we have the needs, and down here we have this custom extraction tool. We have some sort of standardization of customer service reports. So we say that this standardization is in the custom build stage. In an ideal world, we should probably get them standardized and move to a commodity stage before we try to build some sort of machine learning model on top of them, right? So that's what I kind of asked them. So you have all these things here to the left. Should they be there? Can't you do them some other way? And the guys I worked that I did this map with, like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Turns out, from a lot of these components, there were standard ways of implementing them. They just hadn't thought about it. They just figured, okay, let's do what we want to do, and without thinking about the effectiveness of what we're doing. So it turns out data exposure, they had a standard solution. They had a custom extraction tool. Turns out they had a standard extraction tool they could use. That's fine. And this integration here, they could just use an existing API. So all of a sudden, if we look at all of these custom built components here, they only had to build like half of them. So the project was half as big. So what do you think in the chat? Did we avoid complication in this project? What do you think? If we're going to execute.
We have someone though actually mentioning that part, dependencies on custom build down the value chain. So that's exactly what you mentioned.
Yeah.
So that's spot on.
Yeah. Someone has either been trolling in my homepage, or maybe they're really smart. There we go. So
José Casal, if I can, José Casal says this is a huge it depends, right?
Yes, it's a huge it depends. But the thing is that most of the time it's not a it depends. But of course you can't do it with everything. And it's also depends on your situation. But when you do a normal, non-critical IT project, you should probably avoid having these things in the custom-made stage. There has to be a very good reason for it. So
Emily also mentioned that you improved efficiencies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's more efficient, right? Because if they had to build these things from scratch, there would be complications because they were building it from scratch. Now they just reused working components. Okay. Yeah. And do you think that this project delivered value in shorter time?
So by using existing components and not building your own per se.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. Or they might have built
Okay.
them themselves a long time ago. I'm
Right,
not an
so,
expert on what they actually had built. I just did the map with them.
All right. We have a couple of comments. Yes, Emily agrees, totally agrees with you. We have another question from Jose Casal. Is machine learning in the commoditized phase though?
So I'd say parts of machine learning is definitely in the product phase. So there are lots of frameworks you can get off the shelf that you can use, and you just adapt for your own personal use. But there were lots of things that were not related to machine learning that they were going to build themselves here that really didn't need to be built off the shelf. I fully see the value in them developing and testing new machine learning frameworks. And if need be, if it doesn't work with existing components that they can get, yeah, develop it if there's enough customer value in the solution. But that shouldn't be the first go-to, most likely. All right.
Thank you for your question, Jose, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we can say that, okay, what happened? We observed, we oriented, and we decided using this map. So we made a strategic decision around this particular project. And it was done very quickly, and we could do it in a sensible way. And it was decisions that maybe they could have made some other way, or maybe someone with more experience could have told them that they shouldn't do it the way they thought about doing it. But it became very clear what they were doing, and they saw it themselves once they were just slightly prodded. So that's why it's useful at very low levels, so to speak, inside of an organization. Now, we can also look at it at a more strategic level. So this is an example from where we did strategic, or we did the start of a product strategy for a company. And we did Wardley Maps for several of their product areas. And each product area is sort of like a company of its own. There's very little overlap between the areas. So this is almost like a company, but it's a product area. So let's see what happened there. So it's a communications company where they have a customer that wants secure communication. For that secure communication to be secure, or it's verified to be secure, they need a certification. And to get that certification, you need knowledge of the certification procedure. And you also need some sort of a cryptographic algorithm. And to develop the algorithm and get the algorithm, you need an algorithm development knowledge, which means, okay, in this company, there are some very smart people, lots and lots of IQ points, that are developing these cryptographic algorithms. And it's very, very difficult to do. And it's been sort of one of their really strong competitive points in the past, doing this algorithm development. All right, so we did this mapping, and then there was a question, okay, so what's happening on the outside? These algorithms, where are they used? Are someone else using them? Is there any open source alternatives? And then they say, okay, turns out these algorithms, there are all kinds of open source versions that are actually really very good. Really very good. As the same performance as the algorithms that they have been making up. So that means, in the worst case, that these very smart people are no longer giving a competitive advantage to this product line, and in the long run, really, to the company, which is sort of what the company is built on, which is a major problem, because they're going to get out competed by these open source alternatives. So what can we do? So what we can think of is, okay, if we were starting from scratch now, knowing that we have these open source algorithms, what would we do if we wanted to compete with ourselves? So that's what we figured out that, okay, if we're going to do that, we were just going to go and we were going to do some sort of hardening work on these open source algorithms to get the certifications. In order to get the certifications, we still need this knowledge of the certification procedure. And it turns out this knowledge of the certification procedure is not that easy to get, because you typically get it from having gotten the certification before. So it requires very specific knowledge to do this in any sort of manageable way. And part of getting the certification is that you're a trusted company and so on and so forth. So it's difficult for a newcomer to do it. So they still have that edge through the certification procedure. But the very smart people can, instead of developing these very difficult algorithms, harden open source versions. And that's not easy to do. But from what I understand, if you ask me how this is done, I really have no idea. But these very smart people can do it, and it's not as hard as developed algorithms, and it's much faster. So it turns out if they do it this way, they can develop things a lot faster than before. And that's sort of the beauty of open source, because open source is out here, very easy to consume. You have all kinds of external resources driving these open source things to the right. And we can just sort of leech on that and do the certifications, because these the customer will never just use the open source algorithm by itself. They need this certification, and that's never going to happen without a player like us. So that's the strategic move they could make. They could cut down their costs, become much faster, and still get the same result and serve the customer in a good way. And then again, this is something that maybe you could have figured out without Maps, but Maps made it very obvious that this is something that they should try and do. So then again, yeah, the company has a chance to stay competitive or defend against outsiders. And it's likely that their development speed actually will increase. And the flow, so flow as a definition of value flowing to the customer, might actually increase as well. That kind of depends a little bit on, can they actually get the certifications faster and get a faster upgrade to that the customers see. And that's not as, we don't know if that's going to happen or not.
All right.
But that's how it happens. So what do I want you to take home from this? It's two simple things. First, we got to know what's going on here. So we got to know what the customer needs are. And I see this over and over and over when we do mapping at high level and at low levels in companies, is that people don't have a very clear idea of what the customer, well, first, who the customer is, and second, what the customer need is. If you know those two things, you're in a good space, and you can probably execute in an agile way or in a waterfall way, and in whichever way, you'll have a much better chance of a successful outcome in delivering value to your end users or to your customers. And then the second thing is, if you have vital components or parts of your project or whatever it is that are far away from the user and far to the left on the map, that's the zone of death. So for projects and for companies, in a sense as well. If you have a component here that you're relying on, there needs to be a very, very good reason for why you want to use it. And a very good project to do is to take something that is here and just move it to the right so it gets easier to consume. That's almost always a good idea. And again, there is it depends, because maybe sometimes it's something that you is very reliant on. Maybe you want to keep others from getting it and so on. But let's say in 90% of the cases, this is something you want to avoid. So that's an easy thing you can take with you. All right, so having maps, as I hope I've shown here, really helps you in executing the OODA loop. It really helps you observe, get your observations in an understandable pattern. Helps you find out what the options are, and it helps you make decisions. And then you can see, okay, if I act on this, what's going to happen? So you can either act and update your map, or you can do all different kinds of scenarios using mapping as well to try and figure out what the move should be. So highly recommend mapping as a technique like that. So using mapping is in a way very close to playing chess, because it gives you a visual feedback on patterns that reoccurs again and again and again, which means you can train in these strategic games and the strategic gameplay in business, right? So that sense, business, we know, is an infinite game. So the more you play, the more you're going to learn. And Wardley mapping is really a good way to getting better at playing the game. So
for sure.
Some resources I can share with you guys. So most of my maps these days I make with a tool called MapKeep, which is by far the easiest way to make Wardley maps. You think you can just do it in Miro or PowerPoint or whatever, but trust me when I say it's a real pain in the neck to make maps, especially make fast live maps using most tools. I prefer MapKeep over doing it on the whiteboard, everything. So shout out to MapKeep. You can, if you want to do more on Wardley mapping and get a head start, you can go to learnwardleymapping.com and you can use this link here. And my friend Ben has set you up with a 10% discount. So do that if you want to take a course and get into Wardley mapping. Or if you want to use Wardley Maps to try and figure out the strategic issue, or if you have a problematic project, or if you want to do some sort of strategic planning or strategy development, you can get back to me. Just send me an email and book an introductory call. I'm happy to discuss your issue with you and set up a mapping session.
For sure. The participants of this webinar will get everything on their email as soon as this webinar ends. And so I would like to say a big thank you to you, Johan, for you to share your insight with us, and leave it up for questions, for possible comments, questions, doubts that you guys might have regarding Wardley Maps, regarding strategies, regarding, well, everything that you'd like to see more clear. I think it was a really insightful questions regarding the tips and tricks. Avoid the bottom left area of a Wardley Maps, as José Casal has also mentioned. And it's in the end, it's basically everything about decisions and how do you observe, orient, decide, and afterwards act on everything that you can possibly get. And a tool that can provide you this information, this visualization, it's always useful. And as Simon used to say on a couple of his sessions, I recall to all that we had a session in 2021 with him at the World Agility Forum. You mentioned that every map is wrong because a map that is fully correct has a scale of 1:1, but every map is wrong, but some are useful. And so in that way, to make those useful decisions, it's really important just to keep practice, as you mentioned, and avoid those types of mistakes that you advised everyone for us to make. I really like your point on crossing the chasm, and you got me thinking on Geoffrey Moore and how everything is really connected, different types of strategic concepts, and everything in the end sums up in a map, which is a beautiful thing to see. Is there any other tip, other trick, or something that you haven't mentioned already that you like our viewers to leave?
Well, I think it's this. It can be difficult to get going. So Simon has this saying that it takes 6 years to learn to map. 5 years complaining or 5.5 years complaining about how complicated maps are, and then you just start doing it, and in 6 months you're really a very proficient mapper. I was lucky because I learned about maps, and I did my first maps maybe a few months after reading the book and getting the information and so on. And it's intimidating at first because there's so many things around Wardley mapping, with gameplay patterns and doctrine and this and that. But just getting started and getting the easy wins with it is really worth your while. You don't have to go into all these very complicated things. I mean, by all means, do once you feel comfortable. But as you can see from the examples I've given here, some of the patterns that you're going to see are very easy to spot and easy to try and figure out. So just do yourself a favor and get going. And now with MapKeep, it's also very easy to make the maps in terms of just practical use, which wasn't really the case before. So there's no excuse anymore.
Yeah, you mentioned the difficulties of, well, if you draw a line a bit to the left or a bit to the right, and you want to make it right, you have to drag the whole amount of post-its that were connected into the line. So it's a really useful tool that I advise everyone who is a bit curious on mapping to try it out. I don't think that we have any questions so far. What's the most useful, and I'm just to finish, like, in terms of the discussion, regardless of the concept, the context, regardless of the type of industry and company, Wardley Maps are useful, as you mentioned, and I absolutely agree with you. And Doc Norton mentions that I'm curious about the avoid the bottom left advice as universal. This seems to suggest that companies should only use common tech and never take bets on emergent tech. What's your takeaway on this?
Yeah, that's what you can think that it might mean if you look at it the first time. But really, you shouldn't make a bet on emergent tech for the sake of emergent tech. Is what my take on it. If you're going to use emergent tech, you're going to have to figure out, okay, what is the benefit this is going to do for our users or for the specific user we have in mind. There are lots and lots and lots of situations where new emergent tech is really the way to serve the user way better. So maybe you can create a completely new value chain based on emergent tech. I mean, there are cases where you need very emergent tech to be able to serve a customer at all. So we can think about maybe quantum computing, for instance. If you want to really be able to break cryptographic codes and you can get quantum computing to work, you should go for quantum computing. But we have to know that it is very emergent in the case of quantum computing, and it might not ever work. So it's a difficult bet to make. But there are definitely cases where you can use it. But most of the time, then, it will be very central to the value that the customer is receiving. What I'm against is you just do it far away from the user because someone thinks it's fun. It's usually not a very good idea. I hope that clarifies my view, Doc, and that maybe you agree.
Hopefully. I had a question regarding evolution, but it's more a concept of types of usage, because Simon in his book also mentions the different types of how do you mention that, the types of techniques to use in each area of the map. It's not a matter of agile everywhere or waterfall everywhere or wherever. It's a matter of adapting to the circumstances of the different parts of the need and different parts of the product.
Yeah, so far left, you're going to have a very exploratory way of working, and far to the right, you're going to have a very, very focused on zero deviation type ways of working. So Simon calls it Agile and Six Sigma, but I mean, there are many ways of skinning that cat, so to speak. We have another one from Doc here. How often do you find decision makers lack awareness of where items actually belong on the map? All the time. Or rather, once you discuss it, we can typically find or have some sort of agreement on where it is, whether it's in custom made or in product or whatever. And there are shortcuts to try to figure that out. But the awareness of what the value chain look like and why we're using things that are far to the left, deep down in the value chain, that awareness is often missing. Sometimes, a lot of times, people have this intuition that they shouldn't be doing it, but then when you point it out, it becomes really clear, and then everyone can agree that they should do something about it.
All right. Thank you for your collaboration, Doc, throughout the webinar. Not only to Doc, to everyone else. It's been an amazing interacting session. That was the aim for this time with you, which was an incredible session. I have another comment here, Doc. Not in my opinion, you could consider the core, supporting, and generic model from DDD. Core differentiating could belong to the left. The other ones probably not.
Yeah, and there are people who have done overlaps of domain-driven design and things like that nature with Wardley Maps. I recommend you can check out Susan Kaiser, who has done that work, which is very interesting.
Awesome. Here's a reference for you all. Well, let me wrap it up. If while I'm doing this, if you have any questions, any other questions, feel free to ask. As Johan already shared, here are a couple of useful links and useful ideas for you all that you're going to get after this session. And basically, the tool MapKeep with for you to draw your first Wardley map, and also some other session that you can learn Wardley mapping from at agilethinkers.academy, as also the other link that Johan shared with you all. And afterwards, go to rhubarbs.se / all cases for more case studies on what has been the experience of Johan. I'm sure that you have lots of fun reading those cases, as also to book a 30-minute discovery call with Johan. Use his email, johan.person@rhubarbs.se. And don't forget, we will have our World Management Agility Forum later in September this year. Don't forget to have your ticket. Let's have some fun there. Let's explore those different cases regarding strategy, regarding leadership, regarding your favorite companies. That I'm sure it will be lots of fun and lots of powerful insights for you all. And we'll see each other once again on May 23rd with the webinar Visualize Your Business Goals from Strategy to Execution with Dmitry Ponomarev. I'm sure I hopefully managed to have that his name right, and Kanban Zone with Kanban. And I want to tell you once again, big thank you all. It has been a great session. A special thank you to you, Johan. You have been amazing from the start. And I don't know if you want to tell anything else to our viewers here today.
No, I'm very happy that so many came, and I hope you found some sort of value in what I was telling you, and could take home some messages. And hopefully, one or two or several of you reach out. I'd be super happy to have a look at the issues you're facing and try to help you figure it out. Thank you
Awesome.
for having me, Gonzalo. It's a great pleasure.
Likewise. Hopefully we'll see each other again. And thank you once again to every one of you that has been with this session with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you next time.